Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I see we've got quite a few joining us, and I'm going to keep on admitting people as they arrive. I apologize for the late start. I had to restart my computer right at the top of the hour, which definitely slowed me down. So we'll just work on this. All right, yes, I've just enabled live transcript, which will be helpful for both now and for when I publish this later, for anyone who wasn't able to join us. So let me see if I am having all kinds of computer problems today. All right, I'm going to see if I can get my presentation loaded now. And today we are going to talk about custom themes in general, but specifically as they will be used in block themes. So this is a kind of an ongoing, regularly occurring, I hope, series where we'll just talk about all kinds of things related to block themes. We just keep working on getting this slideshow up. I don't have a ton of prepared material. It's more like big ideas that I thought we could talk through. See if I can share my screen. Okay, I have just muted everyone just to get rid of a little bit of background noise, but feel free if you have something you'd like to say to unmute yourself. And now I will finally get my screen shared.
Daisy, I thought we were talking about custom fonts today.
Is that not what I said?
No, you said themes.
Fonts. Well, we are talking about custom fonts as they are built into themes. So
Okay.
the theme is kind of the catalyst.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that. I was trying to do too many things at the same time. All right, I'm kind of managing this all by myself. So if I get a little sidetracked by chat or just trying to keep the admittance to the meeting open, just bear with me. So yes, we're talking about custom fonts specifically as they pertain to block themes. So a lot of this carries over to any theme, but we're going to be looking at least, I hope, a couple of things that are not, they're block theme related, but they could also be used in other themes. So, oops, hold on, way at the end. I've got my housekeeping. Okay, so just a quick housekeeping, disclaimer, I suppose. We are recording this chat, and I will share it via my YouTube channel. And there's some discussion about the possibility of putting this up on WordPress.tv. That could depend on, it could vary from topic to topic. If I felt like it was going to be valuable for that wider audience, then I might. But I don't plan to do that today. So, but I will be putting it up on my much smaller YouTube channel. If you're concerned about video or voice sharing, feel free to stick to text chat and turn off your video, and that would be fine. But we are in a safe space for discussion, so please feel free to participate in the conversation. And if you have anything to say, if you know the answer to a question or know something different than the rest of us, we'd love to hear that. And we're all here learning together. So, all right, so let's go back to my first slide now. Okay, so I thought maybe we would start by just talking about fonts in general. If you've been around web development for a while, you might have, like back in the old days, whatever that means in internet terms, you may have heard web safe fonts were the preferred way to go. They've kind of been retermed as system fonts. So if you hear system font seems to be gaining popularity as far as what we talk about when we're talking about the fonts that are already available on most people's operating systems. They load with no time at all because they're native to the computer that the visitor is using, and they're consistent. So what you would do is you'd build a font stack that would kind of like go through all of the operating systems versions of something similar. So that is like the old web safe fonts idea, and they are fast. They are not necessarily for every case. You don't get the beautiful typography options, script fonts or quirky fonts or any of those things, but you do get consistently available and fast text displaying on your site. Web fonts started to rise in popularity quite a few years ago and continue to be widely used. And they are actually loading in customized fonts or custom fonts that would give you a very specific look and feel. So the most common source right now for web fonts would be Google. And when we bring a font in from Google, we have a choice of either or any other sources as well, Adobe or other places where you can either pull in or download font files. With Google, though, you have the option of either putting a script on your site to load it directly from them, or you can download the fonts and then build them into your project that way and store them locally on your web server. Yes, so this is there's a question in the chat, is this particular to full site editing or for all block themes? I would say all block themes, but even beyond that, I would say most themes in general, because we will talk a little bit about theme JSON and how we might eventually be able to implement fonts in fully within that file. But even a regular existing theme would be able to probably take advantage of that. All right, so any questions or comments on what web fonts are, what system fonts are? I could demonstrate what it looks like to access the Google fonts, perhaps, if anybody's curious about that. Yeah, there's a comment, it's best to host the fonts yourself to avoid fines for GDPR violations. That is 100% true. You almost always, you're going to want those not only for GDPR, but also for the speed that your site loads. Having those files stored locally on your site means that you're not waiting for a call to go out to another server and then come back for that font to load for your site. So, all right, so let's go ahead and look at just the basic interface for Google Fonts. Can you still see my screen? I'm not sure which one I'm sharing. Is it so can you see the slide, or is it a browser window?
The slide.
Okay, all right, then I have to reshare. I only shared the window instead of the desktop. One moment. Let's try this. All right, so hopefully now you'll see a dark Google screen. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so M says not a good idea to use Google Fonts, particularly in Europe. I would say regardless of where you are. GDPR really applies to pretty much everyone because your website is still available in the EU. So even if you are yourself are not within the EU, you should be doing your best to follow those guidelines. So here we are on the Google Fonts site, and you can see there. Yes.
But then it becomes your responsibility how much you have to pay for the extra bandwidth that you use, that your fonts use, and then the speed of your site becomes your responsibility rather than having to use additional workarounds to make the Google font load in a way that will work well for your site.
Well, there's some so yes, the more fonts you have, the longer your site's going to load, and there will be bandwidth issues. If you're using a font, if that's a major concern for you, then sticking to system fonts would probably be the better option because of the liability you would be placing on yourself if you're using Google to host your fonts because of that GDPR issue. They're collecting data about everyone who visits your site. That's true for other Google services as well. So unless you have a really solid cookie policy that includes that, I would just caution to speak to your legal representation if you feel that you aren't sure. I obviously am not a lawyer. I can't really speak to any of that, but there is a lot of room for risk in the way that anything that you're pulling in from a third party comes into your site. That actually puts you in as the in the responsibility of making sure that that third party has done what is required of them legally. And Google is not going to put up a cookie policy on your site. They will assume that you have done that. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I've zoomed in, so hopefully that's a little easier to see. I sometimes forget that I have a very large, high resolution display and that it's a little hard for those viewing it remotely. So if we wanted to have like this quirky palette mosaic font, for example, I can go in here and I have a couple of options. I can either select the style, which I'll do first, and then it's going to give me some code snippets either to link or import. And when you're adding the fonts in to WordPress using the current method in PHP in your functions file, you would take the URL that's in here and include that in the code. That is the file that's going to pull that in. Again, for all of the reasons that we just talked about, my recommendation would be to do this download family. And then it's going to download a zip file that has the actual files that you can install on your own site locally and that can be used for anyone who visits your site by pulling them in from your theme directory usually. There are plugins that would allow you to like register these fonts. The couple of ways that I would, let's see how I want to do this. So we're kind of talking about cloud hosted versus local hosted still. So by downloading it and installing it on your theme, that's a local host. It's not local to your own computer, it's local to your website. So it's going to be going on the server where your website is hosted. And if you have a hosted solution, that's going to be basically using this code or working with this code in order to pull it in like the enqueued styles way, which is the way that we have traditionally added custom fonts into themes up until now. There's a question. Let me get over to the chat a little bit and make sure we're staying on top of that. So there are plugins that can help you to stay GDPR compliant. Let's see. I don't have enough knowledge about those to say whether or not any one particular one is better than another. But there are plugins that have come up after the GDPR went into effect, and before that even, that are designed to try to help mitigate the challenges that presents for websites, because it's difficult to know, as you know, a typical site owner, of what cookies you're collecting and what personal information you might be gathering, or might be gathered on your behalf. So all of those wonderful statistics that Google Analytics provides, it puts you over the edge, I think, in a lot of cases. And so Chris said in Europe you could use Google. RWalk. Google collects information on the use of all their products that's been ruled to violate privacy rights in Europe. And that's Europe right now, or the EU right now. But I would imagine over time more countries are going to be adopting similar things. I'm pretty sure the state of California has something that's similar to the GDPR now. It's not national in the United States, I don't think. And Lisa B, you have a question about how many fonts are too many for a website. The fewer the better. I think that you would want to use them sparingly. So if you were using a font that was only going to be used, let's say for a logo on your site, you're going to put up a text logo and it's really stylized, loading the entire font just for a few characters might cause you, the benefits may not outweigh the cost on that, because it could be a large file, or larger than an image would be. And you can always add appropriate alt tags if you're concerned about accessibility. So that's a whole nother conversation, is how your selection of fonts weigh into the accessibility of your site. Because it's text, it will be screen reader friendly. But if it's there are other forms of accessibility limitations that a font like this one that we're looking here might not be the best choice for certain other limitations that would keep your site from being accessible. And Jeff has just posted a link to a interesting read about fonts and accessibility. So thank you for that. That's great. So as far as how many, I'm seeing suggestions for maybe 2 or 3. That's probably a good baseline. Typically and historically, I think that the core themes, the themes that are bundled with WordPress for each release, have not usually included custom fonts, but 2022, the most recent one, did actually include a custom font. So it is becoming more central. I mean, it's a thing that we have right within WordPress core now. So, all right. So any questions about this Google Fonts piece? I can actually unzip this file and show you what comes in it. So when I downloaded this file, first we get a text file, which you don't need. It probably contains legal information, the license for the font, how you're allowed to use it. Might be a good idea to be familiar with this for any fonts that you're using. I think the Google fonts are allowable for this. They're meant to be used as web fonts, but it's on you to verify that. And I guess that my screen is not very big, and I apologize for that. This is a view that I can't actually zoom in on. But basically in this zip file, there were 2 files. There's a text file, and then there's a TTF file. This TTF file is your font file. And you could do a couple of things. One is you can install it on your own computer and then have it available in any files, any programs that use your system fonts. It would become a font installed on your system. The other option is you take this file and you put it on your web server and you include it in your site in whatever way is appropriate for your application. That could be via CSS. It could be calling it in from your HTML. It could be enqueuing the style in your theme. Let me go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm going to pull up some docs from the developer resources site, which is the developer documentation for WordPress. Let's see, I'm looking for. That's very small. Okay, WP enqueue style. This is the way that we currently add fonts into our themes. So it is the same as what we would use to enqueue a CSS file. So it says the CSS style sheet, but we basically use this for fonts as well. For now, as of the current version of WordPress, this is what you're going to see the most, is this. And it would look something kind of like, that's a terrible example. Let's see if we have something a little bit more user-friendly. So you'd have something like this. So you have your enqueue style, you're going to give it a name, you're going to tell it where it's located. Basically is the gist. So if you look through a lot of popular themes, they're going to have something like this if they have custom fonts that are bundled with the theme. What this does is it pulls it in for your front end. So you can actually use that font family in your CSS for your site. What it doesn't do is add it to the back end. So in order to add it to the back end, currently you have to actually add a another function. I think it's called admin styles. Admin enqueues. Well, that's enqueue scripts, but I think there's an enqueue styles as well. No. All right. There is an admin version of the styles function as well that would then allow you to do that into your admin. So that's currently what you're going to see in themes, unless you're using a plugin or unless the fonts are being loaded in using HTML or CSS. All right, I'm going to switch back over to the chat for a moment.
Daisy, what about
Yes.
the new Gutenberg, how they're working with custom fonts in the new Gutenberg?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, thanks.
We're getting to that. So right now we're kind of like in a historical space, and this is all pretty new. Theme JSON is new. You can set presets for fonts in the current version, but what we're going to get is eventually, hopefully in the next version of WordPress, is an actual web font API, which will mean that it'll be easier to add these fonts to your site. And we'll look at what looks like it's coming to WordPress 6.0. And then maybe something that might come later that looks like it's being developed. So it's all pretty cool to me. So yep, WordPress, Rob Glidden says, how will we use the new web fonts API in WordPress 5? It'll be WordPress 6, mentioned at the WP Tavern. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Where's the best place to install a font file in a theme folder in custom plugin? I would probably put them in a theme because they're design. Your fonts are your design elements. So it's gonna be tied to the look and feel of your site. So I would probably place them in a theme folder. The 2022 theme places them in an assets directory and then fonts, and then the font files are within that. If you're pulling fonts as you go, but there's a connection error, what does the website show? That's going to depend on your font stack. So when you create your font stack in your CSS, it's going to give you fallbacks. So if it doesn't find the first font, it's going to go to the second one. If it doesn't find the second font, it's going to go to the third one. And the idea is that whatever the end of the train is going to be like the most basic font that's available on every computer, like sans serif or serif. Does that mean, Lisa, yes, does that mean we need to create a child theme to contain the custom font folder in the theme folder? If you want to retain the original theme without editing it, then yes, you would add that to a child theme. Because once you have made changes to your theme, it's no longer its original. And if it's something that might get updated from an external source, whether that be the developer might have an upgrade path, or if it's from the WordPress repo, then those get very easily written over, and you would lose all of your custom code. So if you have a theme that you downloaded from the repository and you want to make changes to it, there are two safe ways to do it. One is to change the directory name, and the other is to create a child theme off of it. I'm trying not, so Lisa says, I'm trying not to have child themes with full site editing themes. I guess that will not be possible if I want to use custom fonts. Well, if you're doing those kinds of changes, so you can register fonts from a plugin, so that might be a path for you. If you're trying to avoid child themes, then maybe a plugin might be the way to go. There are always multiple ways to do the same thing, and everyone's needs may be just a little bit different. Yeah, so you say that you create a custom plugin for clients instead of editing functions.php. That's fine. It's just you have to know that that plugin is there, and that's where you're placed your custom code. And tell them not to turn it off, because that will make it all go very, very badly. Putting it in a must-use plugins area is one way to alleviate that problem. Carrie asks, can anyone recommend a font plugin if I'm probably not ready to make my own custom plugin? That's going to probably depend on how you're loading your fonts into your site. Are you using block editor? Are you using a block theme? The easiest way to add fonts into the block editor is to add presets for those font names to your theme JSON file. So let's see, Hans says, but isn't it so that I define fonts also in theme JSON, especially when using global style variations, then I don't necessarily need a child theme, right? Well, if you're saving global styles within your dashboard, then you don't necessarily need a child theme for that. That's going to be stored in your database. If you're going to save it to a file and save that file into your theme, then you've changed the original theme. And if you want to avoid that, then putting those files, those edited files into a child theme instead would be a safer way to go. Tumikia, I hope I got your name right, says, are you going to discuss adding Adobe fonts? So adding Adobe fonts is really the same process. When you download the Adobe fonts to your computer, you're going to get some font files. They sometimes will come with multiple files, and then you load one or more of them into your site, just the way that you would with the Google font. All right, let's go ahead and move into the world of block themes a little bit now and see if we can take a look at how we work with this now with theme JSON in the mix, as well as what should hopefully be coming in WordPress 6. So let me see if I can find an example that's not too complicated. of registering a theme. If anybody has any code
And
snippets
the
handy.
new Archeo theme has custom fonts in it.
Okay, let's go download
And
it.
it's
and
in
see
the
what's going on.
repository, and Automatic put it up like a few days ago.
Fine. Clearly not up on what Automatic is doing with themes. Okay. Themes, Archeo. Okay, this is probably a child theme of block base. So we'll see what we find, but that's fine. If it registers the fonts, it'll give us the same information. All right, so let's open up a couple of these files. I will zoom in just a second so that we can all see a little bit better. Okay, so I've opened up theme JSON and functions. Okay. Okay, let's go to functions first, because I think that's where the styles are likely to be in queued, but they might also be in a subfolder. All right, so the fonts is called Chivo. So let me see if I can figure out where they're being added. It is not jumping out to me. So we have the style sheet here that's being enqueued. So maybe that's where they're calling it in.
They may be using an import from the style sheet.
Yeah, okay. I think that's probably what it is. So I'm just opening that file. Not in the main style sheet. It's probably elsewhere. But I don't see any other styles being loaded.
Sorry, I didn't download it last night. I just found it last night.
Yeah, let's see. I'm just looking through the file structure to see if I see anything else really obvious. So they are using they're using theme JSON to set variables here. Interesting. Well, let's go over to theme JSON and see what they've done here. All right, so we're using version 2 of the theme JSON. And under settings, typography font families, we are adding the Chivo font here, but this, interesting. So they're setting the source. This is actually something that is not available in core yet. So this is what's coming to WordPress 6, is the ability to load your files all from your theme JSON file instead of having to register those in the functions.php file. So this is how they've done it here. I wasn't expecting to see this so soon. Basically, font face is the new thing. And then you set all of the variables or all of the parameters for your font the way you're going to use it. So you see the font's name is Chivo, the display is block. We've got a few different weights here available to us. And then the style, the stretch, and then the source is where it's going to find that file. So in this case, we have the same font that's being applied in different variations. So we have a thin one that looks like we're using for normal. We have regular that's going to use for the font weight of 400. So it's font weight of 100 is thin, 400 is regular, 700 is bold. And then as you go down, then we move into italics in those same options. So in the fonts directory, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 separate files that are all about 36 to 39 kilobytes. So they're not very large files, but if you think about those being loaded up on every single view of your site, they do get cached, which is helpful. But if you're getting a lot of single viewers to your site, then that will eventually add up, but not as much as heavy images on your site would, for example. So Karen asked if it's available with the Gutenberg plugin now. I believe as of 12.8, it was available, so it's there now. This is only for locally stored files. Okay, if your files are local to your site, you can do this file : dot and then the path. And this is the path from your theme. So in this theme, the file is in the theme the theme directory, and then assets, fonts, and then the name of the file. So as long as you use that naming convention and whatever the path is in your actual theme, then this should work if you're using the Gutenberg plugin now and you're all updated. And then it looks like it's been all set to go with WordPress 6. And now things always can change. We still have a ways to go before we get to code freeze for the next version of WordPress. But yeah, so can I show the assets folder? I think I can. Hold on just a second. Extract this. Okay, so here, hopefully you can see that okay. Zoom a little bit more maybe. There we go. Okay, so we've got in this Archeo theme, which I'm quite sure. Isn't it? Oh, it is not a child theme. This is a standalone block theme. Okay, cool. That's neat. If it were a child theme, it would have a template line in these tags here on the style.css, and it does not. So it is the parent theme. If you were to, you can create a child theme off of this. So starting in just the files, we have functions.php, which you're always going to find in most themes, unless they really don't have any functions to use. Index.php is going to be an empty file, but this is just a comment in here. For now, it's required, but it's not being used for any output to the front end. Your typical readme.txt, which is what the repo is going to use to populate its stuff. Screenshot is used on the repo and also in your theme selection screen. We have our regular style.css file that should be relatively minimal. There's a bit in here, but a lot of what they're using, it looks like, is stuff that's being pulled in with custom variables that are set in the settings section of theme JSON. So yes, I will open up the assets file so you can see the font files, and this is what's in here. So the OFL file is the license, and then there are all of these. WAF2 is one type of font file that you might see. So Rob F, are all the fonts in theme.json loaded on each page, or only fonts that are actually used on that page? My guess is that it's all of them. Perhaps later we can get that refined, but this is all very new. Being able to register those fonts, that API is not even in core yet. So this is the first iteration, and I would expect that it's going to continue to improve. If we got to a place where it was going to know what fonts needed to be loaded for that page, that would be really great. I don't know what the impact of that would be to load times, because it's a check that has to happen before the page loads. Okay, so Jeff asked, now, is there a reason why it would be better to add the fonts via theme.json rather than in queue and functions.php? Honestly, it's so much easier to load them into theme.json. It's going to handle both the back end editor side for you as well as the front end side, and it'll keep it consistent. It's, you know, just a few lines to your theme.json file to do it. I think that as time goes on, we're going to be enqueuing a lot less. Like, we're going to be using that functions.php file less and less over time, because we're going to start adding it all into this master configuration file that handles a lot of the heavy lifting for us. Now, if you wanted to be able to load things conditionally, then chances are you're still going to want to use the functions.php. Now, one thing to note, while we don't see it in action here, there's a PHP version for the theme API. So if you prefer to use PHP for this, you will be able to. In fact, I think that there's something I looked like that maybe even like remote hosted fonts like Google Fonts would also be supported by the PHP side. Doesn't yet in the theme.json side. So I don't know. So Jeff, you said that you've heard that eventually themes will be nothing but a theme.json file. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. There could be themes that are just that, but the parts and the templates are going to be a piece that makes one theme distinct from another. The way that the structure of the page is set up. What I would say is that what we're going to see over time is that we get back to having themes that are geared towards specific verticals. When I used to do support for a theme company, the biggest question we always got is, I have an X site, like my site is about this topic. Which theme should I use? And the answer was always the one that everyone hates. It depends. What do you want your site to look like? Because the demos are just demos in those cases. Those themes are all created with wide audiences in mind. They're flexible and they can be adjusted to fit lots of needs. And I think as we move into block themes, we're going to see more and more themes get specific about design, to get opinionated about their design, and you might be able to just plug it, install it, activate it, and run. So it'd be kind of cool. But then it's also so much easier to change things from the admin without having to touch code. Let's see, I'm backing up a little bit. So Lisa, you asked, is there a font file type that's more universal, or do all work equally well in all browsers and devices? I am not 100% sure of the answer to that question. I have seen TTFs, which is true type, maybe. The I forget what it said, WOFF2. Sometimes you download it and it comes with variations. And I think probably it's where is it going to be used would determine. But as far as the web fonts go, I think that they are all basically supported by the modern browsers. There might be some that would be, if you need to support a really old browser, then you might need to do a little bit of research. Carlos, thank you for that. WOF2 is smaller and is supported by all browsers. Great. Yeah, and support used to be much more spotty than it is now, as is true for most things. As we continue forward in this website development world, it's it's pretty interesting to watch as the development kind of forces people forward. So let's see, what else do we have for chat here? You can use new function WP register web fonts to enqueue fonts. Correct. That is the PHP side of the new web font API. All right, Elisa, you say, so if you were designing a custom theme, would you need licenses for the fonts? Definitely. So when even with these freely available fonts, there's still a license. It's still intellectual property. You will need to make sure that the license is appropriate for the way that you are using it. So in the case of this font, it says how it's licensed under the open font license, and then all the details about what that license entails, what the restrictions are, what the freedoms are. All of the fonts are going to have something, and some of them are going to be much more restrictive than others. Commercial fonts will have limitations on how they approve the use, and it is possible that distribution is not allowed. So if you're creating a font for a single client, the client owns the license to use that font on their website, you're probably covered for that. If you're going to create a theme that's going to be distributed on a repository or for sale, then you probably need to make sure that the font is usable for distribution. Okay. Yes. So OFL.txt looks like it's a pretty common name for the licensing file. Yeah, so Carlos says most open source fonts, including Google fonts, are released under a permissive license that allows you to use it as long as you don't sell the font. And I think that this license here, I would presume that because it is put out by automatic and two included in the repository, that this license here is going to be GPL compatible, because otherwise we wouldn't be allowed to put it on the repository. Some fonts are much harder to read for people with dyslexia and other cognitive concerns, so choose wisely or risk losing part of the audience who are not able to read and understand the contents. So thank you, Em, for pointing that out. So accessibility is a really big thing about choosing the way that you're going to display your content. This is true. You know, I hear the question a lot of, where can I find an accessible theme? And the theme itself could be completely accessible at the time you install it, but as soon as you start adding content, that accessibility can actually go away, because it's really there's more to accessibility than just installing a theme that says it's accessible. So I would encourage everyone to, if this is important to you, and it should be, to learn a little bit about what it means to be accessible. So dyslexia is one. And I think that that's where some of these really creative, fun looking fonts become problematic, just because they are difficult to read. And if you add a very creative script font along with bad contrast, then nobody can read it. It's not even just those that would typically have accessibility limitations. So there are tools that can try to help determine whether or not things are accessible. I think that contrast between the background and the text color is one of the easier ones, along with things like how much space is around, how much space is between characters, things like that. Now, I have heard, and I don't have a lot of authority on this topic, so I don't know for sure, but I think I saw somewhere that suggested that you not use a a font that is actually marketed as a dyslexia friendly font, that isn't always necessarily the best thing to do. I know that there are some fonts that you can put on like an e-reader that have like a really heavy base, that I assume that some study was done to show that that helped, but I don't know. I think for web fonts, you're probably better off staying with simple things for the majority of your text. All right, so we have like 7 minutes left in the hour. Let's see if I had anything else that I wanted to cover. Well, I was going to look at adding font presets. So let's jump back into that theme JSON file in this Archeo theme. Thank you so much for suggesting this one. It has a great example of how this is going to look. So we are in theme JSON, and I'm going to collapse some things here just to make it a little bit easier to see, because there's a lot here that we're not going to talk about right now. Okay. So in our file, we're looking in the typography section of settings. So it's settings and then typography. And then within typography, we have font families, which contains everything about the fonts. So we've registered a font family here. So basically this line here, the font family line, is going to add it to the list. So this is available right now in WordPress. You can register a font family and give it a font family, a name, and a slug, and it will show up in the list in the dropdown, and it will create the CSS variable so that you can use it in your CSS. It will not load the actual font itself though, so that's where you need to load it in your functions.php file. But now with what's in Gutenberg 12.8 and what's coming to WordPress 6, hopefully, is this new line of font face. And now we can start to register all of the font styles that should be associated with this font family. So, and as you see, the font family is Chivo is the first option, and then sans serif is the fallback. So it's loading in those 6 files that are available in the assets directory. And then that's it. That's the entire, that's all that's necessary in order to add these in. In 2022's methodology, they actually are doing some preloading, and it's a much more complex setup. I was looking at that code before the call, and I was trying to figure out how much of it I could remove and have it still work, but it was getting pretty hairy there. So seeing this example is really, really cool. So this is what it's going to look like. And then I saw a PR that is not merged yet, but it looks like it's going to add the ability to register a Google font here in your theme JSON file, but it will load it the first time, store it locally, and then pull it from there as long as it exists. So it removes all of those GDPR issues, but it does actually store it locally. So for the bandwidth question, not so great. For the don't get caught by the GDPR problems, it's pretty awesome. Let's see. So what about future coming responsive controls for Gutenberg templates and font sizes? I don't have a list. If somebody else does, feel free to shout that out. I don't know. I did not prepare that for today. I would, if there are specific topics that you'd love to see discussions about, as specific as this, or even, more general. So I have a few more scheduled that are more general topics, and then I hope to get more specific later. All right, so you do need the Gutenberg plugin to be installed in order to use the code that we're seeing on the screen right now.
And it has to be the latest version. It has to be 12.8 or higher, or it won't work.
Correct, because that is when it was merged, is 412.8. So this is very new. Like within the last couple of weeks, it's become available. So this is good timing for this conversation. All right. So Alex asked, so with this theme JSON, I could add another font and copy the code, replacing the font name, add the WOOF2 assets, and it will work. That's the idea. If the first one worked, the second one should as well. It will be all enclosed in these curly brackets. Each font family will be in curly brackets, and you can separate them by a comma. So it'll make the file longer because there are a lot of lines here. Hopefully we will eventually get a user interface to help us build these files. Yes.
Do you know if this will work with variable fonts, font variations?
I think that's what these are. You have to register them individually.
No,
So
the variable fonts are a single font that has all the variation styles in one file.
so like glyphs.
Right, like
Okay.
you could load all the styles that are listed there are part of a single font.
Single file. You know, I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to try it or ask some questions.
Yeah.
That'd be a great thing to find out. I think so because, well, ultimately, yes, probably. That's not very helpful. But what if the PR for the Google Fonts lands, then that would, I feel like, would mean that it would have to support those combined files because that's the way that Google is operating. Because they're serving single files. But that's a really good question. I haven't seen an example of one of those combined files yet.
Thank you.
All right. So Chris says currently there's a paid plugin, Block Styles. Do you know who makes it? WP Block Styles, maybe that's it. Oh, I don't think this is the plugin though. This is more of a learning site. It looks like Carolina has put this together. She is very knowledgeable about all things themes. All right. If anyone has a link to that actual plugin, I'm happy to share that out. So M asked, anyone know if there's a user's guide or knowledge base for the 2022 theme? So anything that's available is going to be in the theme developers handbook, I believe, which is at developer.wordpress.org/themes. I will throw that in here. And then Chris also shared a third party from Kinsta. So I don't know if there's anything specific to 2022 in here, but I would think that anything that they have in here is going to be covering 2022 because that is the block theme that comes with WordPress. Yeah, and the README may have some information, but probably not deep. Okay. And Robin shared a link to variable fonts guide from Mozilla, which is a good source for all things CSS. And as far as Learn WordPress goes, there isn't a lot there on block themes. I know that because I'm the one writing the course, but it's coming. All right, so we are actually over time now. This recording is going to be published on YouTube, and I'll try to get that up by the end of the day. Sometimes the processing takes a little bit. All right. Steve just posted the GitHub for the Gutenberg block styles plugin from Automatic. So great. All right. Well, thank you all. And we'll meet again next week if you care to join. Thanks. Bye.